Ki runga ki te whai au ki te ao mārama tihei wā mauri ora. He tai o rehua, he tai ora, he tai mate. E tangi mai ana te reo whakarongo ki te uru. Ko te whatitiri tuhi ai tōna ara ki te uira. Ka whakaraupeka tātou ia tātou mahara ko rātou kua riro atu ki te rere hua i te pō i te tau ka wehe. Ka aro haina te i tēnei wā o te tau hau. Ko ta tāo te kohu ki ngā maunga whakahi ko te tino koha ngāhi ka aroa he ata whai ki te tangata. Ka kotahi te kupu karite te ara puanga rua ka tūnei te hui a matariki e ki ai ko matariki kaunga kore. Ko hore nei e hoki he kaunga tūturu ma tātou te tangata ki tēnei ao. Ka mai angi nei te kāhui takuroe hiki rangi e ki te pai o tai horonuku rangi ti hei wā mauri ora. Tēnei te mihi kia rātou mā kua mene ki te pō i tēnei pō, i tēnei kaupeka i tēnei peka i tēnei tau. Kua hauhautia te kupinga o tara mai nuku, kua whiturangitia rangatira o ngā wā o mua. Ka huri aku mihi kia tātou katoa kua huihui mai i tēnei wā. Mauri o mai o koutou mate, me mihi kia tika ki a koe te kai kōrero me ki e te kai whakapāwairua. Nau e whāriki hia ngā whakaaro tūturu, ngā whakaaro hōhonu o tātou te Māori, kia hanga ai te arawhata ki ngā rangi tūhaha. Tēnei rā te mihi. Ka huri aku mihi kia tātou katoa kua huihui mai i tēnei wā. E wangawanga au i tēnei ata tērā pia e uana, e taka ana te ua, hore kau e tangata e tai mai i tēnei paupautanga o te rā, e kōrero ki te roro hiko noiho. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi ka koutou katoa, kua tai mai ki te whakarongo mai. Me mihi kia tika ki a koe hoki, Zoe, ki ngā kai whakahaere katoa i whakarite ai i tēnei kauwhau mā tātou katoa. Tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi. Ka huri au ki te reo tuarua, kia mārama ai i ngēnei momo kōrero, kia timata tika ai i wēnei kauwhau o tātou. So, probably not going to translate that because I've only got 45 minutes. And I was told to talk about maramataka, and it's pretty hard to condense like 5,000 years of indigenous knowledge and mātauranga into 45 minutes. But I'll do the best I can. I am also notorious for going over time, so I'm going to try stick to it. But I want to start off with this. I think at this time of Matariki, which some people, we're now in the Matariki season, don't actually spend enough time actually looking at the stars, eh? So I just wanted you to start off having a look at these stars here. This is what the sky is going to look like at 5:45 p.m. tonight, looking towards the east. And I just want you to have a think about who you can see when you're looking at the sky in terms of what stars you can see, planets, celestial bodies. What can you know from looking at a picture like this? And the last question, a bit of a cheeky one. If it's Matariki season, where's Matariki? Oh, people are pointing down. Good guess. We'll get into that, eh? Be good if you come to a maramataka talk around Matariki time, you can find it. So that's one of the outcomes we'll get to. But looking at this picture, I can see that there's more light to the south and the north as there is to the east, so I know that this is about sunset. Because I can see Mahutonga up high, the Southern Cross, and I can see Te Mataua Maui, Maui's fishhook, Scorpius. I know that at sunset, that means that this is around Pipiri, this is around June. If this was sunrise, however, and I saw this exact same sky, I'd know it would be in Te Wariwo Rehua. That would be in the month of January-ish. Because I don't see the moon in this part of the sky, I know that it's not a quarter of the days of the maramataka. And if I was actually outside looking at the stars, I could look and see the twinkling of the stars, and that could make predictions for the weather. If you're using specific stars at a specific time, you can predict the climate, the changing of the seasons. If I look at the high stars versus the low stars, the bright stars versus the fainter stars, there's more mātauranga to be held there too. If I look at the colour of the sunset, that tells us a lot about the coming weather. If I look at the arrangement, the movement of the clouds and the colour on them, if there's one thing that I really want to emphasise is our mātauranga is way deeper than I'll ever get to in my lifetime. One of the beautiful words that I found in researching maramataka is manawarangi. which is just a cloud tinged with colour. But what it also says is manawa is like the heartbeat, the pulse. So when you're taking the vitals of the sky, you do it when those clouds are touched with colour. That's the heartbeat, the pulse of the sky, looking and seeing the colour touching the clouds. And there's some common things that we all feel, like the feel, the temperature of the wind at these times. But what about more interesting maramataka things? Like, what about the smell of that wind? What about the taste of that wind? If you know your local environment, you know if the wind's coming from the seaward direction and you're up on a hill and it's a really strong wind, you'll be able to taste the sea. If you know where the trees are that are in fruit around you, you'd be able to taste the different flavours, the different smells of flowers, of fruits, all from where you are. And if you know how far away they are, you know how strong the wind is. And our mātauranga has more than 100 words for clouds, more than 200 words for rain, more than 300 words for wind. Instead of giving it a number, we give it a specific word. We put those winds into whānau. Rereata talks about how hau mangere, mangere meaning lazy, hau mangere are the winds that aren't strong enough to move a waka. A metaphor for a useless person, hauaria, is a wind that blows but isn't able to move anything. So we've got this beautiful poetry in our knowledge of the winds. Another one is hautatu, little playful kids running around and they're, oi, stop being hautatu. Those are the winds that blow and they kind of play around your ankles as the leaves kind of dance around you, just like the kids do. Haurangi, when you're drunk, that's a wind that blows but you can't feel it on the land, but you can see the tops of the trees swaying, just like a drunk person. So there's so much mātauranga in just words. And I've tried to not go on a tangent, but I already have. Oh, well. So this kōrero is living by the moon, the stars, the land, and the ocean. And I've just kind of tried to show you how deep it is and how much more I have to learn even. Because you can't do maramataka like I would in Te Tai Tokerau here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara. It's so specific to the land and to the ocean that you're on. We've got more than 500 different maramataka just in Aotearoa. And maramataka wasn't something we created in Aotearoa, it was something we brought with us. So our maramataka is very strongly connected to the maramataka of Tahiti, to the maramataka of Rapa Nui, to the maramataka of Hawaii, to the point that if you do the substitutions of letters, you can map them perfectly. So I want to start off with the whakatauki, which is ko tātai arorangi te kai arataki o te rā. The activities of the day are governed by the celestial bodies. And what I mean by that is the naming of the stars, planets, and the moon, and their movement of the heavens were embedded in the practice of everyday life. This wasn't specialist knowledge before contact with Pākehā. Children knew the names of the maramataka like we do the days of the week. They could identify the stars in the morning like we do identify months of the year. Where they could tell pūrākau of those stars, those planets, the moon, just like we do characters on a TV show. So this was not specialist knowledge, this was common to everyone, where even a child knew the names, position, movement, pūrākau of more than 200 stars. And that really touches on a point of the colonization of time. When the Gregorian calendar was brought here, it was brought from a different culture. It has the names, the atua of a different culture. And it's connected to a place, but that place isn't here. To the point that right now we're in June, and Juno is a god of fertility and marriage, because it's the middle of summer and that's where you get married in the Northern Hemisphere. Summer weddings are great, winter weddings though, you get rained on like crazy, so it's not really the time for marriage and fertility here in Aotearoa. But we literally have stars for that. Kohi tātea, kai tātea. If you know Te Reo Māori, you know exactly what you should be doing in that month. So the decolonisation of time then is all Māori having access to this mātauranga, returning to having your days governed by the celestial bodies, reconnecting to our identity as Māori, our identity as Māori as astronomers, and how that tātai aorangi actually connects us very strongly, reconnects us to our environments through mātauranga. And how we do that is tohu. So Coincidence, there's an exhibition called He Tohu. A rain coming in the morning would say, oh, he tohu. And if we're up in Ngāpuhi, he tohu pai te ua. He whakatapu I ngā kōrero. But tohu, any signs or indicators could be as big as, oh, this is the coming tsunami. Could be as small as I can't find my socks. He tohu, I'll wear different ones. But signs and indicators as Māori, if you see a sign of something, an indication of something, that's also an instruction. The word tohu is no different for a sign as it is for an instruction. So when you notice things, you're supposed to act. So this kōrero, and I'm just going to check my time. Oh yeah, cool. This kōrero is around ngā tohu o te maramataka. I'll start off with how I got here, because it's a pretty interesting story. Bit by chance, and I'm very fortunate to end up in places like this after just doing the classic Māori thing of if you turn up enough, you're available enough, then you get invited back next time. I'll go into how specific our Te Tai Tokerau maramataka is for today's date. And to do that, you need to know a bit about Tamanui Te Rā, the sun, Hina Te Marama, the different nights of the maramataka, Ngā Whetū, the stars, and the different kaupeko o te tau, the different lunar months of the calendar, and then also ngā peko o te raumati, the different branches of the seasons. All of which are named after stars. And since it's Matariki, I also added some when and how to celebrate Matariki based on te kahu rātai. If you've got your own tikanga, kei a koe. If you're listening to some other people and they contradict, or we contradict each other, kei te pai. If you have a tikanga and you know the mātauranga behind that tikanga, you go hard. Because again, there's 500 different maramataka, so there's probably 500 different ways to celebrate Matariki. And we've got Taranaki whānui, and they, depending on where you are around the tupuna maunga, you might celebrate Matariki, you might celebrate Puanga, you might even celebrate the setting of Rehua. So how I'm going to do this was just tell some stories we're all familiar with, a 1 minute version of them. Look into them some more if you haven't heard them before. But what I want to really emphasise, and what I decided at 8 p.m. last night, was that I was going to chuck in a bit more of the science of living by the moon, the stars, and the Anded Ocean, and look at some of the scientific literature around Indigenous astronomies, and how there's what we practice is actually supported by the science of how the sky and the celestial bodies interact. Well, I'm going to leave the stories of Matariki and our Tāne Arrange the Stars. We'll leave those for Rangimā Tāmoa. Go look up any one of his kōrero, and he really does an amazing job at communicating that. But with a public lecture like this, I just want to look at some really common pūrākau that we probably all heard as or read as children. But before that, how I got here, I'm from Tokerau, Te Tai Tokerau, and this is Te Awa Tapu o Taumāriri. I was born and went to school in Oruamo in the North Shore of Auckland, but from up north and went there very, very regularly, and still do. With petrol prices, it's getting more and more expensive, so sometimes I Zoom now. But I went to Te Po Waitanga and bilingual education all the way through. And I remember the first time I found out that stars were something that could be Māori. We were at the Star Dome, and I think Rehua was up at night, so it must have been around Matariki time, before it was big like it is now. And someone pointed out, oh, Scorpius, Māori saw this as Maui's fishhook. So then I was like, just obsessed with finding this one constellation every time I could. Didn't know how the sky worked, but every time it was a clear night, I was like, okay, where can it? I was like, it was there. Oh, no, it's there. Oh, no, I can't see it. Oh, well, and just kind of went about my business. But I was always into maths, got into science, studied biomedical science, applied mathematics, did every astrophysics paper that we had at Auckland Uni. There were only 3. But what I was really fortunate to be a part of was the tuakana program at Auckland Uni. And the professor of zoology, Mike Walker, was my boss at the time. Found out I did biology, found out I did maths, and asked me to do some modelling. I was like, okay, don't know what that means, but cool. Whatever you say, Mike. And then he went on this 2-hour rant around maramataka and how our mātauranga knew more than he ever did around the ecology, the zoology of species in Aotearoa. And, you know, it was just me and him geeking out, really talking about science. So how I got into maramataka was from science in a conversation with a scientist. And he said, go read Living by the Moon, Te Maramataka Te Whānau Apanui by Wiremu Tāwhai. But what I found was full moon or a planting day or a good fishing day in the middle of winter is very different to one in the middle of summer, right? Or in the middle of spring. So you needed to go to actually understand a bit further about maramataka was actually look into the stars that surround the moon in the night. And back in 2016 when I got into this, it wasn't as accessible as it is now. You couldn't just jump on Facebook and stalk Rangi Mātāmua. But what I did happen upon, there was a open wānanga up at Te Aurere at Sūhiki Nukumai's house, run by poor navigator Jack Thatcher and Stan Conrad and their crew. It was a fundraiser. I was like, cool, here's my money, I'm coming. And what ended up happening was that I went to a wānanga where people as young as 10 and as old as 70 were learning about tātai aorangi, waka haurua, but because we're speaking in English, we're using scientific terms like right ascension, declination, zenith and meridian, and things that I was trying to teach my students when I was working in the physics department. But for some reason, I struggled to teach it at university, in a university setting, but here, all these people of all different ages, it just came naturally to all of us. It was a bit hard sometimes with the numbers and the geometry, but we all pushed through and got there to have this really deep understanding as an introduction of the night sky. And we went and looked at the stars in the middle of winter, and we ended up staying up there from sunset to about 2 o'clock in the morning, way after the crew and everyone had gone to sleep, because it was just like we were able to see more. We were able to understand more. We were actually able to know what was going to happen and know the names of those stars that we were looking at. And this was quite a paradigm shift for me, because what it really demonstrated is when science is part of our identity as Māori, it is so natural for us to be so good at science. So then what I really want to explore is how can we actually decolonize science, just like we're decolonizing time, so that these scientific knowledges that are within our mātauranga is how we base our teaching, how we base our research as something that's super Māori to be good at science, super Māori to be good at astronomy, as opposed to, oh, you're Māori and you're good at science? That's weird. That's something less Māori. Not that that's something that people say all the time, but it is something that certain people with a certain background have said to me a number of times. But what has happened from there is that I have had amazing opportunities to speak to my people back home, speak to tamariki, speak to Pakekea, speak to my hapu, my iwi, go to wānanga and talk about maramataka, what to look at, how to look at it. But I've also connected to Indigenous astronomers all across the world and been part of research collaborations and amazing conversations with Navajo, Cree, Cherokee, Anishinaabe, Mapuche, Mayan, Hawaiian, all of these different cultures, and what we all have in common is, one, we have something about matariki. There must be something really important going on for us all to have this. And it's also a common starting point for Indigenous astronomers to find that cluster first. What I also found was that Indigenous astronomy is very much about connection and reconnection. Connection to who you are and where you are, but also who you're from and where you're from. So to speak about a bit of the science, we have environmental cycles. We have a day every 24 hours. We have a year every 365.25 days. But what people don't know as commonly is that we have environmental Um, excuse me. We have biological rhythms that predict these environmental cycles. Circadian rhythm is very much researched in scientific spaces. So too are seasonal rhythms. What isn't as kind of confirmed, a bit more contentious, is these lunar rhythms. The tides coming in and out every 12.4 hours. And the phases of the moon changing every 29.5 days. And the biological rhythms associated with that. But there is some more current research, more recent research looking at that. And they found that there's actually a lunar rhythm to our sleep pattern. You're more likely to go to bed later and sleep less on a full moon and the days before or around the full moon. And that depending on the phase, there is a shared shift. And this doesn't matter if you're indigenous community disconnected from technology or completely urbanized peoples. There's still a shift based on lunar light. We've also found that dolphins, their use of echolocation changes based on the phases of the moon, but also the position of the moon in the sky. And, you know, if you're talking about tides, that changes how we fish. But we don't just fish on every tide. It depends on the position of the sun and the moon with that tide, which is all about tidal rhythms and circulunar rhythms that determine when we go fishing. So there's a lot of science saying that there's some legitimacy to this. Some other scientists are a bit more contentious, but we don't need to pay attention to all the science. So I wanted to start off with this picture again and ask, where's Matariki? So some people have their guesses. Talk to the person next to you, chuck out a guess. It's all good if you don't have a clue. Okay, kapai. I saw some pointing, I saw some guessing, I saw some hands moving. This is a picture of sunset. So if you thought Matariki was anywhere on this picture, got to remember that all indigenous astronomies, the important time, the most sacred time is in the morning. So you can't see Matariki here. But if I point out this star, that red star just under that, Te Waru o Rehua, can you find Te Mataua Maui, Maui's fishhook? Yeah, talk to the person next to you, make some noise, don't have to be silent. Oh, thank you. Hopefully you started from that star I pointed out, and you move kind of around like that, and around like that, and that's it there. And we call that Te Mataua Maui. We have this one drop of blood in the handle, and then we have this beautiful fishhook. But then when we look at, one moment, when we look at the night sky and we follow Maui's fishhook as it moves across the heavens, we start to see something really interesting. So if we find that star there, Te Waru o Rehua, and we know that we can see Te Mataua Maui, we can actually watch these stars move across the heavens as the day goes on. And you can see the time down here, that's about 7:30, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And we can see that this star goes right above our heads. In particular, that star there is literally at 12:30ish, 12 o'clock. It'll be right above our heads, meaning it's a zenith star. That will only happen in Aotearoa or in countries around our latitude. And then that Maui's fish hook that we can still see will start to move. 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, 4. And when you get Rehua really close to the horizon, the sun starts to rise. And if you look towards the east, there's that familiar picture that we see, Ring Mātāma say, here's how you find Matariki. But this only works if some of these stars are up, eh? So I'll zoom in a little bit. And I guess if you better chuck this in now, if there's one takeaway I want you to have, it's start with these 3 stars over here, Tautoru. And you can throw a matikara, which is the span from this fingertip to this fingertip. Outstretched hand, this is very different to this. Not too strained, don't tense, you'll get sore. Relaxed. A matikara there, and with your hand, a ringa there. And if you put your matikara on the left side of Tautoru, and your ringa next to that triangle, te kokota, that's how you find Matariki. So find Tautoru and just go like this. If you can't remember which way, if you go that way and there's a really bright star, this one here, you know you've gone the wrong way. But if you go that way and you find a triangle star with a triangle constellation with a red star, you know you've gone the right way, and you have a ringa. And if you don't know the angle, just kind of like ringa around, and you should find Matariki somewhere on the left of it. Okay. So now when we show you this picture, can you find Te Mataua Maui, can you find Rehua, that red star, quite easily? And if you stay up all night, you can even trace it all across the heavens, up to right above you, to setting in the morning with the stars of this time of year rising. But where will Tamanui Te Rā rise? Any answers? East? Yeah, good guess. You're only going to be right twice a year, though. Tamanui Te Rā rises from a different place every day as it moves across the sky. And we have a very common pūrākau about that. Here's a 1-minute version. Maui, because of the sun moving across the heavens so quickly, wanted to catch the sun using a net and convince him to go slow across the sky. So him and his brothers went and gathered some harakeke, weaved this beautiful net to trap Tamanui Te Rā and convince him, but he was still very stubborn and resistant. So he dropped Te Mataua Maui onto the horizon to threaten him and convince him to start making the days longer again. And this is a picture from NASA that I changed to be more, Matariki focused, starting in June. And you can see how the sun will start making its way further and further south as the days get longer and longer. September will be the equinox, the length of the day and the night will be about equal. Then we get to the summer solstice at around December the 22nd, we have the longest day. Then you'll have the March equinox where they're equal again, and then we'll come back to where we are now, very close to the winter equinox around the 22nd of June. But there's some science, some mātauranga around that pūrākau. One is telling you the sun moves, it doesn't always rise at east. But also it tells you when you should harvest harakeke before the winter solstice, because we shouldn't be harvesting harakeke at night, in the rain, in the frost, in the wind, or when in the kōrari and in flower. So that only leaves you a very small window of not wind, not rain, not night, not flowering, and that window is just around autumn time, just before winter starts. And what it also talks about is Maui bringing down Te Mataua Maui, and that's what we see here. When we look back at Rehua, we see Te Mataua Maui smashing on the horizon and convincing the days to start being longer again. And that's when that happens in the solstice, the sun starts moving further and further south, and the days start getting longer. So astronomical knowledge, ecological knowledge, botanical knowledge, all in a very simple pūrākau, but it's only there if you know how to read it. So there's Another way of seeing it, we see that there's a short path across the sky in winter, a kind of equal path across the sky in spring and autumn, and then in summer, that longer path across the sky, the days being longer. People are always surprised. It's like, oh, it's only 5 o'clock and it's already getting dark. It's like, yeah, it's winter. Happens every year. Or, oh, it's 10:30 and the sun's still up. This is crazy. I'm not even tired. Yeah, it happens every year too. It's called summer. So moving on to the sun. So we know that the sun moves now, and we know a simple pūrākau to explain that. When we talk about Hina te Marama, there's another very common story about that as well. And it leads me to ask, which moon is your moon? The left or the right? Give you 5 seconds, lock in an answer. Talk to the person next to you, tell them left or right. And while you're thinking, I'll just tell a very quick 1-minute version of Rona. So Rona was a woman on the earth who was tasked on the full moon to go collect some water. So she collected up her taha, and because the full moon was shining, she didn't take a rama, she didn't take a torch. It was easy to see where she was going at night. She went all the way to the waipuna, collected up the water, but then the cloud moved in front of the moon. She couldn't see where she was going, but she was in a rush, tripped over the root of a ngā tree, smashed the taha all over the ground, and the water went everywhere. In her frustration, she looked up at the moon and said, the only Māori swear word I know, upu kokohua. I'll cut your head off, put it in a pot and boil it to the moon. And the moon was infuriated by this statement and decided to grab her by the ankle and pull her up. In her desperation, she reached around what was right here. She grabbed a taha and she grabbed the roots of the ngaio tree. But the pull of the moon was so strong that both of those ended up going up into the face of the moon with Rona. And for me, knowing that pūrākau, I know that the left one was the right one. And because I know that pūrākau teaches you the anatomy of the night sky, of the moon. Where that's Rona's taha, and this is Rona grabbed by the ankle, so she's upside down, but holding on to this very heavy ngaio tree. And if you see that, and this is my friend Ben Thomason's artwork, now when you look at this, you know which one it is. And this is the moon at the eastern horizon, rising on a full moon. It might be a bit rotated because the moon kind of libates at you. But an interesting thing about the moon is that it orbits as it rotates, so you always see the same face of the moon, which is why some people call the backside the dark side of the moon. We can also see here that the moon falls in from the left, becomes full, and then ends up on the right. And that's again in the pūrākau, because you start with the taha, then you have Rona getting it, then you have her tripping up, smashing the taha, because of the ngaio tree. So you see the taha first, then you see Rona, then you see the ngaio tree, then the taha disappears into the moon, Rona disappears into the moon, and then the last thing you see is the ngaio tree. And how much the moon you see depends on its position relative to the earth and the sun. When this moon is right next to the sun, you can't see any of it because the back's all lit up. When it's a full moon on the opposite side of the sky as the sun, you see all of it. And they have Pākehā words with waxing and waning and crescent and gibbons and quarters. No one keeps up with these words really, because there's too many of them. But we as Māori have 30. Every different phase has a different name. And this is based on a maramataka lemigi. Yeah, so this is a Hokianga maramataka, this one. But I'm from the East Coast and the West Coast, so I use both, depending on where I am, because the most important maramataka to use is one that's close to you, but also on the right coast. A very old school way of breaking up these. In maramataka, 7 days of the week means nothing. Environmentally, it means nothing. Celestially, it means nothing. So what we used to have was we'd have ngāhuru, which is 10. So you go from Rākainui to the middle of Tangaroa, important phases, and it'll be about 10 days. You go from Otāne to the middle of Tamatea, and that'll be 10 days. You go from Tamatea back to those Rākainui days, and those will be 10 days. And you could count 9 lots of ngāhuru, and you know you'll be going from Matariki to the spring solstice. Count 9 ngāhuru, and you know you'll go from the spring solstice to the spring equinox to the summer solstice. Won't teach you ngaharu, won't teach you the 30 days because we only got 10 minutes left. But what I thought I'd start off with was just 4 simple phases and a little hand action to help you remember. So everyone clap. Okay, let's have 1 clap, toriwha. Yeah, that was about 7. One more time, toriwha. Some people in the middle, I think it is. But oh well, we'll move on. Okay, well, I want you to clap after toriwha like this. And say, whiro. Toriwha? We'll move on. There's no time to get this right. So we want to say whiro. Whiro is the ato of darkness, disease, the unknown. He was one of the people who didn't want Ranginui and Papatūānuku to be separated. So everything he does is try to return people to Te Pō. So this is a time where you do things associated with Te Pō. So those aren't things of Te Ao Marama, like running and yelling and being energetic. These are things like wānanga, remembering those who were gathered in the night. So it's not a time to do nothing. In fact, this is the start of the maramataka, so this is the time to plan out the next lunar cycle. This is also a time for whakaraupeka mahara, memory work. You don't remember everything like our tohunga, our kaumātua do without actually practicing how to remember. And practicing what you remember. So toriwha. So one guy at the back really caught off with that one. But all right, whiro. And we clap because you see none of the moon. Right. And then I want you to put your left hand up. I say again left. And wave it up and down like this. And say tamatea. Yeah, and tamatea is when you can see the left half of the moon, which is why you put up your left hand. And tamatea is a ingoa karangaranga, a nickname for tāwhiri mātea. So then these are the days of the ato of wind, the storm, the weather. 4 seasons in one day type weather, 4 seasons in one person type behaviour. So it's a bit of a high energy time, but it can be a bit uppy downy. You could be one of those days where you're like, I got this. And lunchtime you're like, I don't got this. And then you're talking to your mate and like, oh no, we got this. And then by the end of the day you could be going home and it's like, you know what, I did nothing today. Tamatea. And the weather can be the same. Our kaumātua always took an umbrella because even if it's sunny, it could be raining. So we go from whiro, tamatea. So from seeing nothing to seeing the left half, and then we put both hands up and go rākau nui. And a rākau is a tree, or another thing, but we won't get into that. And it can be a very big or great tree. Yeah, so this is a time of high energy, when you can see all of the moon. And it's a time when people can act a bit erratic. So part of that story of Rona is on the full moon, people do crazy things like swear at the moon. Lunatic, that word is literally from the fact that people act a bit crazy when the full moon's out. So you have a lot of energy, but you need to put it into constructive places, otherwise it'll come out in destructive ways. What we also find is that some people are exhausted during the day on rākau nui, and they're like, oh, I'm going to go to bed early, and just rest this night, all through the night, and get no sleep. It's really common to feel a bit more tired right up until the moon rises, and then have this random kick of energy. So just anticipate that. Don't try to get an early night. In fact, this is a good night if you have all-nighters for work or kind of need to stay up for things, or you really want to just talk ad nauseum about something. Rākau nui is a good day for that. And then from our rākau nui, so we've got whiro, tamatea, seeing all the moon, then that left side starts to disappear, and the right hand comes down, and you chuck it out and go fishing, because we're in Tangaroa. We've got Tangaroa mua, Tangaroa roto, Tangaroa kiokio, o tāne o rongo. So these are the days of the forest, of the seas, of the gardens, and all the food that comes from it. See, these are a very productive time. So these are the times that whatever you try to achieve, you can get it done over this week. And what we'll see is if you know just those 4 kind of like main ones, you can see any one of these moons and you can work out, like for example, that one there, is it's not a rākau nui, but it's not quite a Tangaroa, so we're going from a rākau nui to Tangaroa. And just from 4 simple hand actions, you can know a little bit more about the moon. And if you know those phases, you can watch how the moon moves across the stars every night, if you look out at the same time as well. There's so much more we can talk about. We could talk about how the moon, relative to its position, rises at a different time, at its highest point at a different time, sets at a different time, and also how that relates to a moon on the east coast, not on the west coast. On the horizon means that we're a high tide, and a moon at its highest point or lowest point under the ground would be a low tide. On the west coast, there's a 3-hour time difference. So it's a bit harder on the west coast, so I'm lucky I'm on the east coast. It'd be easier for me. But just based on the phase, you can know when the moon's going to rise, because it rises 50 minutes later-ish every day. And based on that, you can work out what the tides are going to be doing to the land connecting to the oceans. 2/3 of the tides is determined by the moon, the position of the moon, and 1/3 is determined by the pull of the sun. So when we have whiro or rākaunui, the sun and moon are pulling together, we have higher high tides or spring tides. And when they're pulling at right angles to each other, we have neap tides, the smaller high tides, the smaller low tides. We can break these down into different ways as well once we get those 4 quarters down, and we can group days together in a way that makes sense to us. And then once you graduate from grouping days together, you look at the individual tohu of every different day. For example, on Tangaroa Kiokio, the tohu for that is Tuna, Kiore, and Pātaki. Seeing those kararehe out during the day is a tohu that you're in the Tangaroa Kiokio, and they'll be more active at that time than any other one. Mawharu, for example, well, the tohu for that would be Koda moving around and being more out and about than usual. Good day for diving for Koda or using your tariki. What we've also got as our last pūrākau, 1-minute version, is Tāne. Maui was thought he was stillborn at birth and was wrapped in his mother hair and gifted to the mourner, which is why one of his names is Maui Tiki Tiki a Taringa, wrapped in the top knot of his mother Taringa. He was found by Kiwa, raised, taught all of this amazing mātauranga and tikanga, and then brought back, returned to his people, but his brothers were not as accepting of the youngest knowing so much. So they went on a fishing expedition and didn't want to take Maui with them, didn't want to let him create fish hooks or tauda with them. So he went to his grandmother, who removed her lower jaw and gifted that to Maui to be Te Mataua Maui. He weaved a tauda and did a karakia to make it unbreakable. He snuck onto the waka, went out at sea, popped out and like, I'm here now and I'm ready to go, and they wouldn't give him any bait. So in his frustration, he whacked himself in the nose and a single drop of blood landed on his fish hook. He threw that into the sea and fished up to Ika Maui, the North Island. So that's a common story, and you can see how the North Island, when flipped the right way up, where this is the north and Muri Whenua is the tail, we can see that the North Island very much looks like a fish, and we've literally got Te Mataua Maui around Hawke's Bay where the hook was hooked into that fish. So it's written on the land and the water, but it's also written in the stars. We can see Te Waru o Rehua and Te Mataunuia Maui as a fish hook. We can see Rehua as that one drop of blood that Maui used to fish up, and we can start to see that there's some kind of milky cloudiness that this fish hook is hooked into. And if you were a Greek astronomer, you would say, oh, that looks a bit milky. We'll call it a galaxy from the Greek word for milk. And then we'll name that galaxy the Milky Way. But for Māori, we call this Te Ikaroa, Te Ikanui, Te Mangoroa, Te Mangonui. And we see that if we go back to Rehua, and we jump back to midnight again, what is going on here? Ah, right, there we go. Hard to see from this angle, but I was actually on it the whole time. What we see here is that we've got Te Mataua Maui, and it's hooked into this big fish. Māori use those gaseous clouds to draw fish scales onto this thing. And instead of calling it a galaxy looking like milk, we call them ikarangi, looking like fish in the sky, and that's our word for a galaxy. And we can see that this fish hook, hooking into that fish, actually draws it up into the sky. And there's a lot of mātauranga associated with that, where the time you see the fish hook, and it starts to rise in the sky, that time of Te Waru o Rehua, we wait for the fruiting, the ripening of the karaka berries, Te Tahu o Rehua, and that's a tohu for us to go fishing. Our fish hooks the time to go there and start catching our fish, and this is why the fish starts to come out of the horizon. Then the fish goes all the way to the top of the sky, like we saw that one dot, that one star Uruwao on top of us, and we know that it's time to start, the fishing season has ended, and it's time to start preserving our fish. And then we have that Te Mataumaui coming down on the horizon, smashing on the horizon to tell the sun to make the days longer. So one thing to also note is that it's very common for stars to have different names, to be evolved of different pūrākau, to make different constellations depending on the time of year. And it was only in 1922 where the International Astronomical Union decided that that's confusing. We're going to have 88 constellations and we're going to have one name for each star, and we're all going to agree on what those are. But before that, there were multiple names for multiple stars based on multiple seasons and multiple tohu o te whenua. So when we get to this time of year, and Rehua's just set over there on the horizon, we actually have, this is how the waka navigators teach it, te waka tamaririti, where we can make a waka all the way from te tauihu o te waka, from the end of Maui's fishhook through the pointer stars, te taura, pointing to Mahutonga, the upside down Southern Cross. These two big sails, Kaipātiki Piawai, with our Captain Atitahi up there flying, and our tōhunga Takurua sitting at the back, and the taurapa with Puanga and Tautoru. What we also want to touch on is that these stars, as they're right above our heads, these are actually, we can use the twinkling, the stellar scintillation, as a predictor of seasonal changes and weather, both in indigenous cultures around the world, but also in scientific terms, because that twinkling is determined by wind movement, the turbulence, as well as variations in the density of the atmosphere, the humidity and the temperature. If the stars look a bit bluer than they usually do, but you need to know what they usually look like, that's a sign that there's humidity, because water absorbs the green and the red spectrums of light, leaving the blue colour, making them look more blue when rain's coming. But you also need to look at the edges. If they're like jagged and blinking really, really quickly, that's a sign that there's some really bad weather. Could be a storm, could be a cyclone coming. But if it has really clear edges and it's twinkling really fast, that's actually a different sign for really clear weather. And this was all published in scientific literature, looking at the basis of these things. So when we have wind moving up above us that we can't really see, but we can see its effects on the stars, that turbulence produces moving pockets of air that vary the density, that end up refracting, bending the light in different ways, and the speed of wind determines how quickly they're twinkling. So you can see the changing of the trade winds, the changing of the seasons, the different winds bringing different weather as the seasons change through that. It's different if you're looking through a lot of atmosphere, so those on the horizon will twinkle a bit faster than those right above you. Brighter stars need more wind to be twinkling like that, and the fainter stars need less. And then the top stars versus the ones on the horizon, those ones, if they're really twinkling, that's a really strong sign that weather's changing, that weather is coming. But at this time of the year, when we're using matariki, there's actually a publication published in Nature that talks about Incan farmers using the apparent brightness of matariki at the time of the winter solstice and the season of matariki, forecasting short-term climate for the growing season from around October to May, just like we do as Māori for kumara. And you can forecast interannual, so between-year variations of summer rainfall and the yields of autumn harvests. And what they use to predict these are four things: the apparent brightness of the cluster, the date you first see it, because that can change depending on the atmosphere, the size, how spread out it is and how tight it is, and the brightness of different stars, because what we're actually seeing, if we have poor visibility of matariki at this time of year, that's actually caused by clouds we can't see, subvisual cirrus clouds, the top layer of kind of icy clouds, and those, you have a lot of that when you've got an El Nino year coming. So if we've got some icy clouds making Matariki look really spread out, looking really big, kind of amplifying its brightness, that's usually a sign of good weather. Whereas if we don't have that and it looks a bit tighter and you might have some humidity, that's a sign that we're not in an El Nino year. So they correlated atmospheric weather data to predictions of Indigenous people, and they were correlated very strongly. So our tikanga is actually not only informed by science, but informs the science of now. And you can see that as reading the stars to see the unseen, to see what you can't possibly see with your eyes, or you can interpret it as listening to the stars who tell us what's there, what's left unseen. So what we can also do, it's called Te Warua Rehua because it's associated with the 8th kaupeka, the 8th lunar month. And instead of watching it move over the night, it does that movement over the year as well. So this is where Rehua is tonight, but also where Rehua was in January in the morning. This is where Rehua was in March. And if we do a matikara, two matikara, a double shaka or awanoi, we would come down from Rehua and find Poututerangi, the star for the 10th month, Te Ngāhuru or Poututerangi. If we look to Whānui next to Poututerangi, and that's about, I don't have a Māori measurement for it, but a Spider-Man. A Spider-Man from Poututerangi to Whānui and a ringa down at a right angle, you can come to Te Ngāhuru Mātahi, the 11th month of Painga Whāwha. And then a month later, you would see a kōti, the length of your finger, down in the same line. You'll come to this triangle, and to the left of that triangle is Te Ngāhuru Mārua Haratua. And last new moon, instead of calling it Pipiri, we added in a 13th month called Te Ngāhuru Mātoru o Ruhanui. And why we did that was if you have a 29.5 day lunar cycle and you times that by 12 lunar months, you get 354 days. And there's an 11-day slippage from 365 days, eh? So then what do? Well, after 1 year, you'll slip by 11 days. After 2 years, you'll slip by 22 days. After 3 years, you'll slip by 33 days. And Māori are just like, oh, you just chuck in an extra cycle and you're back on track. And that's what we do. Every 3 years or so, we chuck in a 13th month named after Ruhanui, who is an atua associated with leisure and relaxation and fun, really. If you've got an extra month, do some extra things. So there's all of these different lunar months, there's different descriptions of them, and there's an order starting with Pipiri all the way down to Ngāhuru Mārua Haki Haratua, and sometimes all the way down to Ngāhuru Mātoru o Ruhanui. And then we've got tohu for each of these lunar months. We've got a description of that star, because all of these months are named after a star. We've got stars we can look at, like Puanga Matariki Tautori rising and Rehua setting. We can look at the tohu o te whenua, like the meadow fruiting, and the kukupa migrating to those meadow growths to eat. We can break those tohu whenua into another branch of these seasons. But we also know that the manawa, the raureka, the kohikohe, the maire, tāwhake, the rangiora are also in flower. We know that the karamu, karawao, pātotara, raukawa, kohikohe, maire, miro, and pipiri in that order are going to start fruiting. We know that the kuakai have probably just finished migrating, that the taiko fledglings, the kakapo, pukiko, and kukupa are good to be snared, although that was made illegal in 1865. But what this is really is that not every month is the same. This is a low energy month. The days are short, you have less time to do things like Maui and his brothers. But it's a low energy time to reflect, time to remember, make those memories, share those memories, time to celebrate and time to plan. And it's also the time for the winter solstice. But on top of that, for us in Te Tai Tokerau, we actually have branches of summer, where instead of using just the moon and the stars, we actually use different tohu for branches of the seasons. And we don't have spring or autumn, we have kumara time, summer, not kumara time, winter. Very different to here in Wellington, because if we use the tohu of Te Tai Tokerau, we were in winter in February. So that doesn't work. But we'd use the fruiting of rimu, the flowering of pua wānanga, the flowering, the blushing of pahutakawa, the cracking of the land, the landing of pollen on the fields, the seeds falling, and then the leaves following that fall to tell which phase of summer we're in. And sometimes those can change. Sometimes it's just a day. Sometimes they last 3 months. And sometimes they don't even pop up that year. And then we've got branches, ngā peka o te takurua as well. Wero i te nenenhi, wero i te kokotao, wero i te whakataka pungarehu, takurua auru, takurua anganga, takurua aio. And we have different tohu based on the winds and the temperature, and also what you should be doing to determine that. So in terms of ngā tohu o te maramataka, today's date, you may have noticed the moon, it was past Tangaroa, but it wasn't quite whiro, so we're in Ōrongonui. We're in the 13th month, te o te Ngāhuru Mātoru, named after the star Ruhanui. And we're in the north, in the season of Wero i te Kokotā, because we've had that piercing wind, but we haven't had that period of warm where we go mixing our ashes into the fields to fertilise the land. And that is a very different date to Wednesday, the 14th, random number. No environmental reason at all. Named after Juno, the goddess of fertility and marriage, named 2,023 days after the birth of Jesus. See how all of that is steeped in a culture that isn't from here, that isn't related to this whenua, versus today's date in Maramataka, is also very connected to a place. It's not here, it's up in the north. But that's okay, closer than Jerusalem. It tells us knowledge of the stars, and it also tells us knowledge of how a specific star relates to a specific ecological feature, and how that lets the environment tell us what time is, instead of telling the environment what time is and saying that spring is late, winter's really warm, winter's too hot, winter's coming a bit late, winter's here again. Winter's winter. Winter does what winter wants to do. Summer is summer, and it does what it wants to do. Our job isn't to make expectations on it. Our job is to listen and be able to tell when it happens. So I'll just wrap up, because I've already gone over time, with a couple points around when to celebrate rehua, puanga, and matariki. The main point is after you see them. Don't celebrate matariki, rehua, puanga before you see these things, because how are you celebrating it if you're not going out to have a look? And if you go out to celebrate and it's clouded over, go out the next day, celebrate again, and see if you can see it next time. If you realise you've picked a spot that was beautifully artistically chosen to have your hautapu, but there's a tree in the way of exactly where matariki is, don't cut down the tree, pick a different spot. So, if you're celebrating rehua, you celebrate when rehua sets, and that's approximately, it changes based on the climate, the 16th of June, and you want to do it in the right lunar phase. So for us in the north, we do rehua as well as puanga, as well as matariki sometimes, where whiro is when you do your tuku wairua. You know, the art of te pō, makes sense that you release, you send the spirits of those who are deceased to whiro. Then we'll get up at puanga. Puanga is seen a week before you see matariki, around the 8th of June. And in the right lunar phase for us in the north is Ōturu. On the east coast, the day before the full moon. On the west coast, the day of the full moon. Because it determines the weather of your local environment. So if you're going up on a rainy day and it's always rainy that day, you're not going to see much. And matariki rises about a week after, around the 16th of June. Start looking in the 14th. I've never seen it then. 15th you can see it sometimes, and 16th is pretty reliable at seeing it then. Because the sky moves about half a kornui every day. So if you go at the exact same time, the sky will have moved half of your thumb. And the right time to celebrate that, according to me, according to Ringi Mātāmua, is Tangaroa. And I did it in this order for a particular reason, because it's a beautiful whakapapa where rehua and whatitiri, 2 stars, give rise to puanga, hinetakurua, and matariki. And why the whakapapa looks like that is rehua and whatitiri are sitting in the west, they're going to bed together, and their marriage gives rise to, in order, puanga rising, takurua rising, because it's a really bright star, you could usually see it earlier, even though it comes up from the horizon later, and then matariki, the youngest. So again, just a really short whakapapa, but so much astronomical knowledge held within it. When is the matariki public holiday? Always after matariki has risen, so after the 16th of June. It's in the Tangaroa lunar period, because that's the time when you have a week to celebrate, to whatever you put your mind to, you can do it. And this is a bit weird, but it makes sense. It's always on a Friday. That way you go home on Friday and you spend the weekend with your whānau, spend the weekend with your hapu, your iwi. And that's why you can see it changing. So last year was the 24th of June. If we had 11-day slippage, it would have been on the 13th, and Matariki wouldn't be up yet. Let's chuck in the extra month, and now we're celebrating it in July. 11-day slippage, chuck it in July. 11-day slippage, chuck in an extra month. And it's not exactly every 3 years, because there are 3 days. Excuse me, but it's around that time. Does that make sense? Cool. How to celebrate Matariki? It's different if you're mana whenua. Tiro whetū, actually see the stars. Sam Rerekura talks about how you go out at sunset and you watch the stars, you tell all the stories until Matariki rises. That's why you do it on a full moon. Good night for an all-nighter. But also that moon is a clock that when it's the horizon, you know Matariki's up. Tell the pūrākau and wānanga the knowledge that's held within them. Matariki, the theme for this year is Matariki Kāinga Hokia, so it should be about mana whenua returning to where they're from and mana whenua running kaupapa so their people can return there. Remembrance, start off with a karakia, a tuku wairua, a purupuruaki, name and honour those who have passed since the last rising of Matariki. Look to the future, have a hautapu and a karakia to each of those stars that you're celebrating, and look forward to the promise of a new year, and then celebrate the present with the hakari. Have a big feed, the most Māori thing you can do. And I do it in this order because as Māori, we remember the past and bring it into the present, but before we act in the present, we also think about the future. The past is our foundation, and the future is how we decide what we're doing, and then we act in the present. For families and community who aren't mana whenua, who aren't tangata whenua, join in where appropriate. There's so many things happening now, it's everywhere. Look it up, Google it. If you don't want to join in somewhere, you just want to do something with your whānau, watch the Rising of Matariki and share any stories you so choose. Remember those who have passed on. Celebrate the present. Gather together with your friends and your whānau. If your family, was traditionally from Christchurch, get your whole whānau to get back there. And then look to the future and look forward to the promise of a new year from this Matariki to the next one. And I put a picture of fireworks as a reminder. Don't do fireworks. They block the sky. You want to be looking. Where to start? The program that I use was Delirium. It's free. Google it, chuck it on your laptop, have a tutsu. Look up local events. Look up podcasts, look up YouTube. There's stuff everywhere. Have a watch Ricky Solomon's E Oho Kōrero. Rangimatāma's Manawatia Matariki Kōrero, specifically around those kōrero of Matariki. Read out to Makiha's Wakahoia for basics of maramataka, all in te reo. And then have some time to read and think. Look at Living by the Moon by Winamu Tāwhai, Matariki by Rangimatāma, Puanga by Sam Rerekura, and read those sections as those celestial phenomena are happening. Read every kind of bit every day for a whole lunar cycle, and you'll get way more out of it instead of reading it like a book. So that's our kōrero. This is what we did. And what I'll leave you with was this whakatauki. Kia kaha te titiro te whakarongo te mātakitaki te whakaro a te waka marama. So carefully look, carefully listen and feel, carefully observe, and carefully think. And with time will come understanding. Kia ora mai rāno tātou.
Ngā mihi nui, you're a master educator. I love how these really complex ideas you convey with humour and in a really accessible way. I've seen you speak a few times, and it is incredible the way that you communicate, especially to those of us who might be new to some of this. I do feel like we need a whole series of wānanga though, so we might look into that. We've got 5 minutes for pātai, but we might stay on if people would like to, but feel free to leave at 1:30. I have got some questions online. We had about 400 people register online today, which is really amazing. We've got some mics in the room. So do we have any pātai? We'll just...
I feel like come on the Jerry Springer show. Kia ora ihoa. Recently went to Hawaii and it made me think about, maramataka katoa I roto I te moana nui a kiwa. And I might be wrong here, but I had a whakaaro, Hawaii is one of the motu that are located in the northern hemisphere, I believe. Yet they celebrate Matariki as well as part of their tikanga. And then most of our other motu are in the southern hemisphere. Have you any whakaaro around that, or have you thought about that before?
Pai te pātai. Oh, booming. Yeah. Well, that actually speaks to exactly what happened in Aotearoa when Pākehā came, eh? They came from a different hemisphere, but they kept their calendar system. So our whanaunga in Hawaii did the same thing, where they had a southern hemisphere calendar and they took it to the northern hemisphere. A lot of the names of the stars are the same. They've kept those. A lot of the tikanga is the same. Like, for example, we wouldn't just celebrate Mataraki's rising, we'd also celebrate its setting as a symbol of the year that's come to an end. So they still celebrate Mataraki in their winter, but the setting of but the rising of Mataraki in the morning. Although their environment is different, remember it's a tropical environment though. They have two seasons too, a wet season and a hot season, and the wet season is still pretty hot. So their maramataka would be adapted from where they came from to where they landed, just like we did with ours. And if we knew the tohu of those days, we would adapt our maramataka based on what we were seeing. But it's really interesting if you keep in touch with some of our aimalama in Hawaii. Their weather systems are kind of similar to what's happening in the rest of the Pacific, and you can keep track of those changes like that. But also their maramataka, their days of their moons are exactly the same. They have hilo, but for whiro, for us in Aotearoa, whiro is the atua of death, darkness and the unknown, but he's also a master navigator. So they have a whole island hiro. They have, if you lay our maramataka next to each other, the days are almost exactly the same. But instead of having tamatea days, they'd have ku days, their version of tumataonga, associated with coconut. They, instead of having the rākau names specifically, they'd have rākau tahi, rākau rua, rākau toru, just the 3 days of that. They'd have the 3 days of tu, they'd have the 3 days of tangaroa, which they call ka'aloa. So it's almost exactly the same, but understanding that maramataka is so adaptable that we adapted it 500 different times just in Aotearoa. Of course, we could adapt that to a completely different island nation in a different hemisphere, but it's making sure that we listen to our environment that leads those adaptations instead of just taking it and chucking it on an environment that's foreign to us. Kia ora.
How you going? I'm Merv by his name.
Kia ora.
What really interests me is that when we're looking at the stars, we're always looking back in time. All right, so even the brightest stars are probably, the image we're seeing is probably about 4 years old. Some of the duller ones maybe even up to 100 years old. So is there any instances that Maori recognise of where stars are disappearing? So we're seeing them but they're not there anymore?
Yeah.
Or even the other way around, where stars are appearing, all right, that haven't been there before. So we can't see them today, but suddenly they appear tomorrow.
Yeah, pai te pātai. Yes, in short, there's a beautiful poroporoaki that Rereata Makiha shares that literally talks about shielding your eyes from the death of a star. And he uses that to identify exactly when Autupuna and Te Tai Tokerau left Hawaii. So yes, there's examples of that. If we're looking astronomically, right now Pūtara, Betelgeuse, is 50% brighter than it is usually because there is a variable star. Science doesn't quite know why that is, but stars do vary. Stars do get brighter and get less bright as well. But what also happens is over really long periods, is that the North and the South Celestial Pole changes. So what is the North Star right now, 5,000 years ago, would have been a completely different star. And a lot of indigenous astronomers not only put that North Pole, that South Celestial Pole where the sky rotates around as the middle of the sky, but the middle of that 24,000 year rotation is the middle of the sky, because they've been watching, it's not observed over a lifetime, it's not observed over a couple generations, this is observed over thousands of years. And that's how we got to our Tātai Aotearangi and Aotearoa. So they're very familiar with these longer periods of changes of the night sky and how you need to change your mātauranga in terms of how to navigate that. Also of the brightness of stars changing, stars disappearing, stars coming out of nowhere. But I'd separate the two different types of knowledge of the night sky. Tātai Aotearangi, which is kind of for everyone, as Māori, versus our tohunga kōkōrangi. So being able to identify those stars and how they lead our everyday life is different to knowing really specific the depth of those more nuanced, more subtle changes and how they determine how a hapu and a iwi would behave. So, in short, yes, Māori have it. They have so much. They have these amazing things. However, not all of that is meant for everyone, including me.
Any more pātai in the room? We've got online, we have a compliment. As we
Nice.
often get. A compliment and a question. Awesome presentation. Thank you for sharing this information so clearly. Tikanga informs the science and the science backs up the tikanga. Is there any way we can get a copy of your PowerPoint presentation? And that sort of follows on from what I was going to say next about our online presence. But
Yeah, probably not.
people following any of your work? Is there any way they can follow your work?
Kind of like a patupaere here in terms of that, where you just pop up somewhere and like, I don't know, go be there. Oh, me neither.
Yeah.
But here I am. But this one will be recorded online.
Yeah.
So I think what I advocate for is not separating our mātauranga from the occasion they are shared.
Yeah.
So like, my koko said it to me very clearly when I was like, he asked me, like, oh, whakapapa mai tō whakapapa kia maki. And, do your heke, do your genealogy to one of our tupuna. And like, and I was like, kei runga taku roro hiko? It's like, it's on my computer. It's like, oh, kore take te waiho ki te roro hiko, me tuhia ki te roro. So like, it's a waste of time having it on your computer. You need to have it in your mind.
Yeah.
So I try not to share these because the way that we're supposed to hear our mātauranga is being shared by someone
Yeah.
and not separated by the person who's sharing.
Yeah, and I should have said, actually, we'll have this recording online in about 6 weeks' time. And I think those links that you put up at the end, maybe we'll put those separately so
sure.
people can find extra resources. Are there any other questions before we close? Because we're a little bit past 1:30 now.
Kia ora. This is sort of a question that just sort of popped up in my head the last 5 minutes. But I was interested to know, when you're exploring and sharing such mātauranga and the depth and the sort of wairuatanga that's also applied to your thinking and how it unfolds, where and how do you create safe space for our mātauranga to unfold, given it's sitting within a Western scientific platform in some cases? And where and how do you navigate that space as a kaiako operating in institutionalized frameworks like Western institutions and libraries and universities? What does it look like carrying that our mātauranga alongside a Western science where we've seen over the last couple of years it's not always a safe interchange?
Kia ora.
So I was interested to know what it's like for you. How safe do you feel?
Oh.
How well? Sorry, I don't know if that
How
was a big
safe do
question
I
to
feel?
ask. But
Well,
you
let
know,
me
I
unload
was-
on everyone, shall I? Pai te pātai, Tēnei te mihi ki a koe o whāraki hia i rei whakaro a rangatira e pāna ki tā mātauranga nei. One thing I'll share is when we're given mātauranga in the right way, we're also given the responsibility to share it, but to share it in the right way as well. There's some things that that have been shared with me that is meant for me to hear but not hold. Some things that have been shared with me for me to hear and hold but not share. And some things that have been shared with me for me to hold and decide when to be sharing it. So part of this kōrero was, looking at science, really positioning myself in maramataka as someone who came from science. So I don't want, my goal in my research is not to be rangimātama, not to be rere tamakiha, because he tohunga kia tira, waiho mā te whare wānanga ngā tohunga e aki aki. What I want to do is redefining science so that Māori scientists who know the science, know these tools of science, can be of use to our tohunga. You raise a really interesting point around, being situated within a university. And, when you work with your whānau, they're very quick if you're doing the wrong thing to resituate you in that university as well. But I think all of us operating within these spaces and these universities, Crown Research Institutes, government agencies need to understand that we are in those, and when we're operating in those within our capacity, we should be operating within how we should operate within those institutions. However, when we move out of those, then we can share more fully. When we're in wānanga, when we're in marae, when we're noho, when we're talking to our tamariki, we can get into the depths that has been shared with us, because those are the right ways to share it. When we're talking in forums like this, I like to share really simple stories that everyone's heard before, like rona, like Māui and tika Māui, like tamanui te rā in Māui, because those are simple stories that also have depth. So then you're not sharing anything that's too tapu, but you're exploring the depth of things that we take for granted. But yes, how safe do I feel? Sometimes super safe, sometimes super unsafe, and depends on the day and the situation and what end of the spectrum I sit on. But what I find comforting is that doing this way isn't new. Māori scientists who have been, grounded into our Māori have been doing it for decades. And if you meet up with them and have good conversations with them, they can help guide you to do things in a safe way. They can challenge you to put yourself in sometimes vulnerable situations too. But they also have conducted research in a way, as scientists, that means that you don't have to be a scientist without being Māori, be a scientist without bringing te ao Māori with you. Does that answer the question? Ka pai.
So just one more from online. This person says, you said in the context of maramataka, we don't need to listen to all the science. How can we help Māori determine what scientific truth is without encouraging them into confirmation bias?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things in the statement, we don't need to listen to all science, is that science claims objectivity. Science claims to be unbiased, but we as Māori have seen how science is a system in terms of the teaching, the research, the legislation, the policy, who decides who's funded and who's not. What we call those funds, like Endeavour or the James Cook Fellowship, is very much not determined scientifically. So it's not to say that just because we want to feel good about this science that backs us up. I think what I was more advocating for is understanding sometimes scientists need to understand their position. If they're researching mātauranga with the very explicit goal to disprove it, they can set up their research such that they find something. So it's not we don't have to listen to all science maybe, but it's we have to be aware of the research, the science that they're doing, the researcher who's doing that science, and what their position is when it comes to te ao Māori. Because sadly, if you can come up with a beautiful scientific research project based on te ao Māori, really, innovating and empowering, advancing, and also protecting mātauranga, depending on where in the system that's positioned, it might not get funded, it might not get published, it might not be disseminated as legitimate science. So, not saying just pick the science you like, but when people are saying things that support you, look at where their position, what their motivations are, and when someone is saying something very disrespectful about Indigenous knowledge, also look at their position, what their motivations are, and whether their claims are scientific or ideological. Because I acknowledge that my position is biased. I acknowledge that I'm ideologically driven, radical, political even. But what I'd also argue is that almost every scientist is. You can't be unbiased. You can't be objective. You can't be... if you're maintaining the status quo, that is a political position. If you're trying to advance against progressive movements, that's a political position. And me trying to redefine what science is again a political position, an ideological position, and informed by my positionality, my grounding in Te Ao Māori as a scientist. But as a Māori scientist who's more focused on their Māori identity before their identity as a scientist.
Ngā mihi nui. I think we'll bring this to a close. I'd like to thank you for allowing us to all go back to work and say we're low energy, it's the maramataka. I'm going to get myself the calendar and I'm going to be, yeah. So thank you for coming down with your beautiful whānau from Tāmaki.